Hello, and welcome to a Fragmentarium video conference. I am your host, Bill Duba, and today we are having the second of two roundtables on cataloging fragments. Today we are discussing loose fragments, and I have the pleasure of being joined by researchers involved in three major ongoing projects. The first presentation is from Godfried Croenen, who directs the Medieval Manuscripts and Flemish Collections project. Dr. Croenen?
Thank you very much, Bill. I'll give a very brief overview of the project before I sort of address the questions which Bill has set us. And let's see if I can move this along. Yeah, so Medieval Manuscripts in Flemish Collections, short MMFC, is the project I lead, or at least it's the outcome of a project I directed in 2019-2020. Its aim was to catalogue online all the fragments and manuscripts held in present-day Flanders, so the Dutch-speaking part of Belgium, covering a very long period, 600 to 1600, and with a very wide target audience in mind, so the general public, high school, university students, but also heritage professionals, in particular librarians, but also people working in other areas of heritage, and researchers, academics. So we're trying to sort of serve all these people, which is, as you can imagine, a challenge. 2020, the original project ended, but we managed to get funding for a follow-on project, which has a new name, Comites Latentes. But essentially, we are continue to catalog items in the MFC database, but we focus on two collections or two sort of groups of collections that are more vulnerable than the other collections. That is, on the one hand, ecclesiastical institutional collections held in situ, so in the convents, in the abbeys, in the parish churches, on the one hand, and on the other hand, fragments, which we have in many collections, but which are sort of often not very well known, not very well catalogued, and hence also, in a sense, vulnerable. Of course, for the latter project, we are collaborating with Bill and with Fragmentarium, which is the reason why I'm here to talk to you about this today. The database, again, very briefly, we present sort of basic information for all the items in principle we have found in the Flemish collections, and then for some of them, that is the ones which we have catalogued with the book or the fragment in hand, we have detailed codicological descriptions, and of course we use linked open data, linking to other sources and so on, including online reproductions on Fragmentarium. We have faceted churches, and I'll show you two which are sort of relevant here in this context. For all the manuscripts, or at least I should say for all the codicological units, we can indicate whether they are complete, defective, or fragmentary, or unknown, which many of them now are currently unknown because we haven't seen the manuscripts ourselves yet, or haven't catalogued them ourselves yet. We also have a facet on to indicate whether or not the manuscript has an in situ fragment or fragments. And here we are sort of on Fragmentarium, just an overview of some of the more exciting items which we found. Okay, let's look at the challenges we have when sort of dealing with loose fragments. First of all, I should say, and I haven't sort of put this on a slide, but of course we have all the challenges which anyone working with fragments has, is that textile sort of all fragments are often not in a very good condition. They're small, they're difficult to read, they're difficult to identify. We work a lot with recent graduates, and these are sort of very committed, hardworking, intelligent people, but they don't always have the expertise to deal with these, or they have expertise in one area, say in Latin or Middle Dutch, but not in all the other things which we need. Especially many of the fragments are, of course, liturgical fragments, and also a lot of them medieval scholarly texts, so theology, philosophy, medicine traditions, which are often not sort of very well edited or studied. But let's come to the loose fragments in particular. What are the challenges there? First of all, the caches, the many caches of uncatalogued fragments, and that sort of hampers the planning and including the writing the grant proposal. It's very difficult to apply for funding if you don't quite know how much you have and how long it's going to take to describe these. And it's really, we need to do the work, we need to do the project before we can actually predict how long it's going to take us to do the work. And some of the, here's an example. So what you see here at the bottom is a description taken from the recent catalogue of medieval manuscripts at the University of Ghent. And this is very helpful, at least, so it says manuscript 2582 and 2583 are a collection of unidentified fragments in Latin, Dutch and French, 12th to 16th century, 19 boxes. Well, at least we know there is something there, and there is a call number. I can call it up. It turned out to be sort of 700 fragments in total, most of them unnumbered. It's not all of them manuscripts. You see sort of printed fragments, not all of them literary fragments, some of them documents, not all of them medieval. We had sort of fragments, an autograph fragment of a well-known 19th century Dutch author in there. But yeah, you really have to work through this before you actually know how much there is and how long it's going to take to do all the work. So that's a massive difficulty. And here, of course, we knew there was something there. We had a shelf mark. In many institutions, we don't even know that. We can think there might be something there, as most collections have, like a box in which they put fragments. But then again, it sort of takes work. It means going to the reading room, talking to the people in charge, and at some point somebody will remember, yes, we have something like it. Is this what you mean? And then they will bring it out, and then you don't know how much it's going to be or what it is. But again, that sort of makes it very difficult to plan very accurately beforehand. Second challenge is dealing with what I call the suboptimal conditions of the fragments. Here you see they have been mounted, and this was done fairly recently in I think the 1970s, and not too bad, but still it means the fragments can't get lost. So that's a good thing. The bad thing is they don't have individual numbers. There are sort of bits which we can't read because they have been glued to or mounted onto the paper and so on. So this was sort of taken apart recently when we started cataloging it. Here is another example, and yes, that thing on the left, the shiny thing, that's sticky tape. And the good thing is, with what we're doing, the keepers of these collections become more aware and are sort of taking steps to conserve these items better. A third set of challenges is that, well, I've mentioned before, fragments not individually numbered. They're often they have a sort of an overall shelf mark in the best case, but it's not possible to start to catalog them individually unless sub-shelf marks have been assigned. So we are sort of talking to the people in charge of the collections, but that again takes time. Sometimes we have like metadata, like here, this was from a cache of fragments in one of the archives, and somebody had sort of written on these cards an identification, and some of these cards we couldn't match up with the fragments, meaning the fragments were no longer there, but we had a description. So that's a difficulty. With these three examples, we have no provenance data, so we know it's from the archive. We assume it was taken from a register or found in one of the archival documents, but we have no information about the provenance and no information about the host volume. So that's a great problem in many of the collections, even the ones where we have data, like here is an example, again from Ghent. We have sort of a very cryptic note. We don't know where it's come. Well, we know it's Nieuwenhuizen, the name here, written here, that's a Dutch collector who died in the middle of the 19th century. There was an auction, so we assumed that the library bought a lot of fragments at the auction. And then later on in 95, so 1895, the well-known codicologist Willem de Vreese added some more information on this. But again, I didn't understand this. It was only thanks to the person in charge who recognized the handwriting, and sort of we then figured out that the original card with just the name must have been there. De Vreese was appointed in 1895, so we started immediately adding more information to these. But again, often these notes are very cryptic. Sometimes they refer to, sometimes they have names or shelf marks, but we need a lot of additional research to identify the host volumes or the provenance of these. So I think my time's up. Thank you very much, and I'll pass on to Bill again.
Thank you, Dr. Croenen. And next up is Dr. Anne Fellinger of the Archives d'Alsace. Dr. Fellinger.
While fragments of medieval manuscripts are quite common in libraries, looking for them in an archive deposit where they can also be found seems less obvious. Most of these fragments come from bindings and were isolated from the 19th century onwards. They're often neglected by today's archivists because of their isolated nature and therefore remain most of the time undescribed. Thus, we have a few collections of fragments in the Archives d'Alsace that deserve to be studied. I'm not going into details of the interest of these fragments represent, as you probably know much more about it than me. I'll give you some hints about their classification and the knowledge we have about them. But first, let me give you some institutional background, as it helps to understand our classification system. Since the French Revolution, which shaped the current administrative organization in France, Alsace, a region located at the east of France and bordering Switzerland and Germany, has been composed of two local administrative districts, Bas-Rhin at the north and Haut-Rhin at the south. The public archives were kept in two different deposits, named respectively Archives départementales du Bas-Rhin, located in Strasbourg, and Archives départementales du Haut-Rhin in Colmar. Very recently, in 2021, a reform brought together the two territorial authorities into a single entity, la Collectivité Européenne d'Alsace, and the two archive services were merged into the Archives d'Alsace. The Archives d'Alsace thus inherited two distinct archives collections in two localizations with two different classifying systems, but also different archival softwares and two distinct websites. This situation explains why you will not find the same information today for fragments preserved in the Archives du Bas-Rhin and those preserved in the Archives du Haut-Rhin. As I said earlier, the archivist interest for preserving medieval fragments in Alsace, as in other French departments, began in the 19th century. In the 1920s, two directors of the French National Archives attempted to centralize fragments preserved in the French departments in order to facilitate their study. Two circulars in 1925 and 1930 requested the fragments transferred to Paris. Nowadays, these fragments thus collected are still classified in the National Archive in AB 19 series. Although these instructions were more or less followed around France, the Alsatian archivists responded well to the request, both in the Haut-Rhin and the Bas-Rhin. We know, for instance, that Bas-Rhin sent 56 fragments, including, for instance, 26 fragments of Latin manuscript on parchment, or 24 sheets of Latin manuscript on paper. Fragments from Alsace, however, did not remain in the National Archives. After the annexation of Alsace to the German Reich during World War II, the German authority brought them back to Alsace in 1943. So this is the origin of our fragment collections, although they have grown over the 20th century as we have more of them now. 708 fragments, 391 of which have been identified as fragments of medieval manuscripts, are found in the Oran archives. These fragments were collected by archivists in a specific collection classified in the Varia series and called Fragments MS. These fragments have all been digitized by our photographer, Isabelle Gérard, and you'll find the image on the website of the Oran archives. This website is being updated and will have a new interface within a few weeks, so I won't present it right now. But if you go to the site, you'll find this type of information. As you can see, the description is mostly a physical and material description. Archivists have some additional information that's not yet available in online databases, and that comes from the work of archivists in the 1980s, 1990s. For example, for this fragment, we know that it comes from a 1558 books binding preserved in the Commandery of the Order of Malta, located in Souls collection, which is kept in the Oran collection under the reference number 33H. But this information remains basic, and archivists today need the help of researchers to have a better description of the fragments preserved. And I would like to thank two researchers, Christian Meyer and Laura Albiero, who have recently identified and described these fragments. They're about to publish their catalog. Their data should also be integrated into our archival databases soon. Fragments of Barin are not classified in a dedicated collection, but classified within the J series, which is in the departmental archives in France, dedicated to extraordinary entries among many yearly entries. So far, I've counted at least 300 items that were being examined. We've just started digitizing these fragments. The finding aids are not retroconverted yet and not available on the Barin website. And if you come and visit us in Strasbourg, you'll get this kind of information. As you can see, this is also quite poor. Actually, here too, we have some additional information, which comes from the handwritten inventory established by Françoise Grégoire, who worked in the 1980s, 1990s in Strasbourg. She compiled some material description, the origin of fragments when known, as well as a beginning of description and even transcription. Sometimes for a few of them, we got some complementary and more recent information thanks to researchers, exhibition projects, or scientific collaborations. For instance, we know that this little Merovingian fragment came from the Luxeuil Abbey. It was exhibited in 2015 in Luxeuil-les-Bains in the exhibition de Colomban à Luxeuil, de Luxeuil à l'Europe, des manuscrits en héritage. We also know that we have under the reference number 151J50, one fragment of a copy of the Lex Visigotorum from the Lorsch Abbey, thanks to the project held by the Heidelberg University Library that aims to virtually reconstruct the Lorsch Abbey library. And I cannot resist to show you the most recent discovered fragment of this collection, a fragment from a manuscript of De Laudibus Sancte Crucis by Rabban Moore, found in a document binding of the archives of the Order of the Hospitallers of St. John's of Jerusalem from Celesta. Today, our goal is to offer researchers images of these fragments to promote their study and facilitate their exploitation. As I said, fragments of Orin have all been digitized, and we have started the digitization of fragments of Barin. If these images are or will eventually be offered on our websites, we also have very high quality images set for various uses. When necessary, the fragments are first inspected and treated on a material aspect by our conservator, Marie Renaudin. And in fact, most of them often show so many wrinkles that their photography is made difficult. Some have various adhesives, glued papers, and old repairs that can alter the readability of the text. One of the questions that arise is, when trying to get access to the original fragment, aren't we likely to lose elements of information that would make it possible to identify the book within the fragment was found? For instance, on this fragment, we had to remove the consolidation paper, which could document the context of its reuse. Again, we are deeply looking forward to researchers' feedbacks on these issues. Finally, such a digitization project, as we have seen, forces archivists to strongly update their finding aids and descriptive data to normalize them and offer them to the public online. As such, scientific collaboration and feedbacks are a real contribution to get better knowledge about those fragments, their origins, but also their circulation and exchanges in the Rhine area during the medieval period. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Fellinger. And now, finally, we have Dr. Marie Turner from the Cambridge University Library. I believe it's the Additional Fragments Project. Yeah. Dr. Turner, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Bill, for having us all here today. And yeah, so for the past 9 months, I've been part of a project at the Cambridge University Library that's aiming to complete the cataloging, conservation, and digitization of a selection of the more than 2,200 known fragments within the UL's additional class mark. Over the next few minutes, I'm going to speak about our approach to cataloging. My aim here is not to be exhaustive or to offer some kind of manifesto for the correct way to do this work, but rather I'm going to share 4 key queries that have given rise to fruitful debates for us in our offices, and which I hope will spark some conversation. But first, a little bit of background. So the UL holds more than 80 collections, or caches, I liked that term, of Western medieval manuscript fragments within the additional sequence, comprising at least 2,250 individual items, not including those still in situ. The material, textual, and linguistic scope of this collection of collections has previously been known only in broad strokes via a series of unpublished descriptions written by several 20th century curators and a brief handlist compiled by Jane Ringrose while researching her summary catalog of the additionals early this century. As part of the history of acquisition here at the UL, the additional class marks were created in the middle of the 19th century to designate new manuscripts added to the collection. And indeed, many of the fragments did come to us in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, bequeathed by various personalities, including librarian Francis Jenkinson, whose interest in what we today call fragmentology is well documented. However, the vast majority had already been in the library for centuries at the time of their so-called acquisition, waiting in the bindings of other codices to be removed and formally recognized as significant holdings in their own right. For our purposes, this institutional history is important because it reminds us that the UL fragments are deeply tied to the early history of manuscript curation and cataloging in Cambridge. Indeed, the voices of long dead librarians loom large, and they are both guide and foil. Fragments were recognized as worth saving, but their organization is decentralized at best. Many are accompanied by disused envelopes or scraps of paper, scrawled with notations like "from a binding" and tossed in a box, meaning from my perspective as cataloger, each day is a kind of lucky dip of form and genre. Moreover, while brief handwritten descriptions may provide priceless data on provenance and often a ballpark identification, they equally often use outdated terminology like binding waste, or offhandedly describe a fragment as containing, quote, nothing of interest, in attitude anathema to the very nature of our project. And this kind of curatorial ephemera is included in our records, an example of which you can see here. But before moving into the actual sort of nitty-gritty of cataloging the fragments, I want to say a quick word about how we catalog manuscripts more generally at the UL. And we encode in TEI, which for those of you who are not familiar is an XML adjacent language. And we use the MS Desk module that was adapted by Matthew Holford of the Bodleian Library and our own James Freeman, which provides a general scaffold for the shape of our records, as well as something approximating a controlled vocabulary for things like decoration and script. And our metadata is then uploaded to the Cambridge University Digital Library, or CUDL, alongside high-resolution digital images. And this serves several purposes. First, the digital format facilitates accessibility by turning a static document into a static description into a living document that can be easily updated as and when new information comes to light. Second, providing images means that we can link directly to places of interest in a manuscript, and that excessive detail is avoided because readers are always looking directly at a digital surrogate. And so you can see here, this is an example not from the project that I'm working on, but from the Polanski Greek project, which also dealt with fragments, because our fragments have not been digitized yet. And finally, CUDL has IIIF capability, meaning that our records look toward the future imagined by fragmentology, whereby boundaries between collections and repositories are broken down, and the work of catalogers, conservators, and digitization specialists across the globe may be united virtually. So finally, we come to what's meant to be the meat of our discussion today. How do we catalog our loose fragments? So I don't think it will surprise anyone present when I say that this question, both seemingly basic and deceptively complex, is central to our joint enterprise. How we view and define fragment fundamentally affects the way we approach our task as catalogers and helps us to define the purpose and principles that guide our work. And in the interest of time, I will simply say that the basic assumption we work from is that every fragment exists at all times in at least 2 locations on a timeline of use, from original manuscript through binding component to present day fragment. And in practice, this means cataloging becomes a balancing act, at all times recognizing any given fragment as part of a once complete or more complete manuscript, while simultaneously acknowledging it as an epistemological whole unto itself, a complete fragment, if you will. And this central paradox is literally present in each record we create. So when cataloging in TEI, the phys desk element contains all relevant information about the form of the object, its extent, its layout, its dimensions, decoration, and so on. And if we look at the opening portion of phys desk for MS Additional 4406, number 44 here, we can see that within the object desk tag, form equals codex, while under extent, type equals object, with the object type designated as fragment. This is the dual identity of the fragment made machine readable. Because the bifolium was once part of a codex, object desk reflects this previous identity, theoretically reuniting the fragment with the rest of its parent manuscript. But of course, it is not a codex, and the extent and object type tags below reflect this, describing not an idealized complete manuscript of the past, but the current object whose fragmentary dimensions are listed below. And this is both the challenge and beauty of working with fragments. It requires a concentrated effort to view each of its lives and identities as distinct yet united, like looking through a prism. As fragments move out of the hidden corners of our institutions and into the spotlight, one of the core queries we face is how to group and organize them. And it appears to be a pretty straightforward question. If, as I just said, each fragment is an epistemological whole, then surely each fragment should receive its own class mark, the same way a newly acquired codex would. For us, however, it's complicated by that messy institutional history that I spoke about earlier. Our fragments were previously grouped, often completely arbitrarily, under a number of additional class marks. Some were then numbered individually and partially described. A handful are even significant enough to have literature that cites these existing class marks. For these reasons and more, we generally follow the system already in use. While each fragment does have its own unique identifier, the class mark itself is tied not to the individual fragment, but first to the physical grouping and then to the source manuscript. For example, here you're looking at MS Additional 2769 number 1, which consists of 2 contiguous strips of parchment from a 12th century noted breviary. Under our system, the fragment on the left is MS Additional 27691 item 1, and the fragment on the right is MS Additional 27691 item 2. And the order of items is determined by the layout of the source manuscript when possible. While we try not to modify or reshuffle established class marks, there are occasions when changes are made for the sake of clarity and findability. For example, where fragments grouped under separate class marks are discovered to derive from the same source manuscript, as is the case with MS Additional 2750 number 9 here, the fragments are combined under a single class mark and a custodial note is added in the record. This class mark now contains leaves previously split between MS Additional 2750 numbers 9, 12, 16, 18, and 22. And then, of course, there's always the exception that proves the rule. Manuscript Additional 2697 number 63 consists of 8 fragments plus 3 pieces of accompanying material, but it cannot be cataloged in the usual way. During use in a binding, pieces from at least 2, possibly 3 source manuscripts became adhered to each other. Because there is no way to separate these sort of multi-fragments into their constituent parts, they must be cataloged together under the same class mark, the same way we would a composite codex. The question of how to catalog bifolia has been a source of regular conversation for us over the past months. We knew early on that bifolia would be cataloged and photographed flat, that is to say, as they come to us in their present state, rather than folded as they would have been as part of a quire. This, as far as I am aware, is the standard method. Certainly it's the way that bifolia usually appear in the Fragmentarium database, but it also creates a number of issues within the TEI framework. To choose one example, even a task as simple as documenting layout initially felt fraught. If we're viewing and measuring each bifolium as a flat fragment with a single recto and verso rather than as 2 leaves, should our layout descriptions still reflect that of the original complete manuscript? Ultimately, we came to the decision that this is one of those moments where our records must reflect the inherently contradictory nature of fragments. The extent tag counts each fragment as a discrete physical object, but layout must gesture back to the original presentation of the text, so far as we are able to discern it. Ultimately, this again is a question of findability. The main function of the layout field is to allow researchers to gather all manuscripts, fragmentary and otherwise, with the same written layout. If we obscure that in our zeal to legitimize the fragment as a complete object, then we create more problems than we solve. We've also run up examples where subsequent use of a bifolium has obscured its original shape or format, requiring somewhat complex descriptions in the record. And here what you're looking at is MS Additional 2697 number 7, 2 contiguous partial bifolia from an early 13th century psalter, later used as a slotted spine cover. And both bifolia retain heavy creasing down the center from use in a binding, but while the bisected bifolium is still folded in the same direction as when it was part of a codex, the complete bifolium has been folded counter to the layout of the original text. As information of this kind is valuable to researchers interested in both the original text and format of the manuscript and the manner of use in the binding process, we decided to include this information in the summary at the top of our records, rather than hidden below in a condition or collation note. And thinking about reuse brings me to our last query, and I just want to touch very briefly on one way that we capture reuse in our records. So previously, we had included information detailing any association with known volumes in our collection under the provenance tag, an example of which you can see on the screen right now. But in working with our conservator, Jennifer Murray, an expert in the use of manuscript components in 16th and 17th century printed books, we've added the capacity to include new information regarding the type of reuse to our records under the extent tag in FISDesk, linking to the controlled vocabulary devised by Legatus via the new term type reuse context. At the beginning of the project, the opening of the extent description looked something like the top example here. Very basic, simply recording the fact that this is a fragment and that it came from a medieval manuscript. Now that same tag has been expanded to capture the manner of reuse, as you can see in this record for MS Additional 26974, 4 pieces of parchment from a single leaf of a 12th century Bible, subsequently used as a tabbed comb spine lining in a printed book. Including this information not only gestures toward a fragment's identity as binding component, supplementing the data found in the provenance field, but opens up new research avenues by creating the potential for readers to search for all fragments used as a particular type of binding component. And finally, and I'm aware that I've gone over my time here, I want to conclude by saying that though cataloging our fragment collections is an end in itself, at the UL, we've also found the project to be a valuable outreach tool. Last year, we had a doctoral student in the history faculty working with me for a term, honing his existing skills in paleography and codicology and gaining new ones in the basics of TEI and cataloging. He facilitated a well-attended transcribathon workshop, which resulted in another postgrad student joining the project. Taking the time to bring these students on board not only means we get more fragments cataloged, but also that we're helping to create the next generation of fragmentologists, showing young scholars and librarians in waiting that these collections are fertile ground for us to reimagine how we understand, describe, and present medieval materials. Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks to all 3 of our presenters for some really fascinating and engaging projects. So I just wanted to we'll start with a bit of a panel discussion or questions here. Are there any questions among the presenters for the other projects or ideas or issues that you'd had?
Because we haven't started the digitization process yet, I'm interested in hearing about the conversations that surrounded that process for the other panelists, looking at that image of the bifolium that was very heavily creased and then being flattened, and wondering whether those kinds of choices are being made on a case-by-case basis, or whether you sort of decided that you wanted to get every item back as close to something resembling sort of its original state, if that was even possible.
Yeah, I think we are in a sort of slightly different situation in that we don't have our own collections, so we are an organization working with the libraries, and so we can't take any kind of curatorial decision, and for us it's a conversation with the different libraries and what they want, and some, especially larger libraries, have an in-house conservation workshop where they can do things, and for others it would be applying for money to get an outside conservator involved, and so that's a very different kind of situation. So we just see what the people want with the collections, and in terms of photographing, we just sort of try to photograph them as best as we can. I was interested though in your sort of bifolium question, because I think the issue there is if you have more than one bifolium and you want to have a virtual reconstruction on Fragmentarium, it's much easier if they are photographed as individual folios than volumes, but that's not a question.
Yeah, well, I think we are lucky because we have at the same place the conservator and the photographer, and so we can see step by step what we'll do with these fragments. And our goal is to get an image which enables the legibility of the fragment, but not to be too intrusive with on the material aspect with these fragments, not to be too interventionist. I'm not sure that's it's okay. And so I would say that it's really a matter of, is it possible to take the photography in the state the fragment is, or does the fragment need a treatment, any treatment to get a valuable photography? And also I was interested because we were wondering whether it was relevant or not to present these fragments as an open bifolium, for instance, or not, because it's not exactly the same photo. But we decided to treat it like an object, because that's what we are doing most of the time. But maybe there's other option.
Bifolia just seemed to cause, like, we have talked so much in our offices about how to like whether we should be thinking about it as one recto, one versa, whether we should be like, treating each leaf individually, like what, should we be, when do we, record the individual measurements of a leaf only when it is like, do we only do it when it's reasonably complete, or do we measure the leaf even if we know it's not a complete, like, and it seems like they're going to be creating similar issues on the sort of digitization end as well. Which is, I mean, I never thought I would be spending all of this time worrying about bifolia. And we, I mean, I see Dot is asking whether it be possible to photograph bifolia in both ways. I mean, I think that's unfortunately a money question, like whether we have, at least I think from our perspective, it is, because we have some fragments that we know, for instance, that the comb spine lining that I showed the images of, we know that we want to photograph those both sort of the way that they would have looked, which is like, look insane, but like this as an actual, the way that they would have fit together on the leaf, but we also want to photograph the way that they fit together as a binding component. But we have to make those decisions on a case-by-case basis because we don't have, there's an individual cost associated with each image.
I can add sort of two more thoughts or comments about our practice. We are very pragmatic. Ultimately, if we put things on Fragmentarium as we do, then most people want to be able to study the original codices where these manuscripts come from. So if we have two or more fragments where they fit together, we usually photograph them together. Although we also take sometimes photographs of both of them separately, at least we have a photograph where they're physically put side by side, because that's much easier than trying to do a virtual reconstruction where it perfectly fits. And in terms of where we have like sets of bifolia which form complete quires, like we had like sort of, I think 16 bifolia of an Ovid manuscript. We put them in the right order and photographed folio per folio rather than take them apart. And then also because I think they were not foliated either, so that was a pragmatic decision which we felt would be much more useful for researchers wanting to use these reproductions. But I think, but what sort of Dot suggests photographing it twice, I can't imagine. I mean, it takes a bit of time, but not as much time as going back and doing it again at some point in the future when you decide, well, actually, we should have done it. Yeah. And manuscripts were out and we had the material and so on. But that's my thought.
I'll just jump in with the cheap way we did it in Fragmentarium with Leipzig. When the University of Leipzig did their loose fragments a while back, what we did was they just photographed the whole bifolia and then we cropped. So we have both the object view and the text with the relationship to the original page view. But it does raise questions like, I mean, how are you going to call a bifolium a recto and verso when it's both on both sides?
Yeah, let me tell you, it really messes up descriptions.
Yeah, we do give them, if they're not foliated, we give them a virtual number, which we put in brackets. So we say this opening is folio 1 verso -2 recto.
Oh,
That's how we
interesting.
label that image. But the numbers in square brackets, because they're not there, they're just yeah. I see Laura has asked me a question. Shall I address
Please,
this?
we can go to we can have we'll pass to some general questions and discussion now. So yeah, Laura asks, what do you do with unnumbered fragments? Do you give them a provisional shelf mark?
Yes, we do. And again, that's a conversation with the people in charge of the collections, like the Ghent, the two shelf marks, the two call numbers, 2582 and 83. We sat down and with the people responsible for this, and we decided that we could assign sub-shelf marks identifying each fragment or set of fragments, where we thought, well, these are 2 or more fragments from the same manuscript. And yeah, that's sort of a bit of give and take. In some cases, the people want to do it themselves. In other collections, they simply don't have the resources, the time, or the expertise to do it. And then we can do this, but until we have identifiers for each individual manuscript fragment, there is no way we can put this in the database.
I have a question for Dr. Fellinger, just out of curiosity. When you have, so how many of your fragments were removed to the Archives Nationales and then returned? And of those, do they have any indications of their host volumes, or is this all lost?
How many? I only know how many for Strasbourg, 56, but in Oran, I don't have the right number now. What we know is that in the National Archives, it remains files about this. But as far as I know, but I think Laura Albiero knows it much more than me, you only have information about 6 fragments, photographs and copies of 6 fragments in the National Archives. And I don't know why, but for the moment, they haven't kept information about the others. So I hope we can get some more information, but I'm not for the moment. I have not yet found them.
And Laura confirmed that the Archives Nationales have black and white photos. And well, maybe I have just a question for all 3 of you, or for any of you that will want to deal with it. Do you have documentary fragments like charters, and how do you consider those as fragments, for that matter? How do you deal with those? Anything special with those? I mean, so.
Yes, I mean, we have quite a lot of them because we are dealing with these caches of documents which were taken out of fragments, which were often taken out of bindings of either archival documents or early prints. And since we are assigning sort of new sub-shelf marks in conversation with the manuscript keepers, we can't skip these, so we have to do the whole lot and then decide, well, only these we will catalog for the project. But we provide them with some basic metadata in terms of dating the language, whether it's printed or handwritten, and some kind of what it is about, if it's an archival document. But there are interesting things. I mean, Bill, you probably remember the thing about the official of the Bishop of Paris and the University of Paris. These documents we found, interesting stuff, and stuff that's sort of appeared here in Flanders that is not connected to Flemish medieval history. so it doesn't get picked up. But it's interesting, I think, to let this flow through to the catalog of the libraries, so at least it can get picked up by researchers working on those areas.
Okay. Well, we have, I'll get to Martin Roland just a moment here. We have just Thomas Valmanje in the chat had a comment on the 56 return fragments saying that we don't have a precise list and he could only find 18 of them with certainty. Martin Roland, did you have a question?
Yes. I was a bit astonished because a charter for me is not a fragment, because a fragment is something which is produced by destroying something, whereas a charter is a single sheet and it was not destroyed when glued to a manuscript, but preserved. That's something quite different. If the origin of an object is a single sheet and not a codex, do you think about this distinction?
Well, what I'm talking about is all, well, not just charters. Some of them are registers,
Different.
So they're fragments, and all the charters I've come across are never complete charters. So they're always fragments of charters.
But there never had been a book.
No, but they're fragments of the original charter. So I don't see why it shouldn't be called a fragment.
I'm not sure about that.
Yeah. Is there anyone, would Marie or Anne, would you like to comment further on this or add your own? Because we have this constant problem. What is a fragment and what is this? And I think one of the issues that we deal with is if we're looking at binding reuse, it's a charter may not be a fragment, but it's part of the same phenomenon of reuse that one's documenting.
Yeah, I mean, does a fragment have, like, I mean, if we're talking specifically about binding fragments, they can be coming from all different sources. I personally haven't dealt with any documents yet, although I am about to, although it's a slightly different situation because these are documents that have been put in a guard book along with several, with many other fragments that come, that do come from codices. So it's a separate issue, and something that I have been thinking about, because for the most part, these documents are basically complete. They're heavily trimmed, but the textual content is largely complete. But I don't think, for me at least, the source, whether it's coming from a flat, like a flat document or a roll or a codex, to me, that's the source is not what determines whether when it comes to us now, it's a fragment. I'm not sure if that's what you were trying, if that's what you were saying. But I mean, I don't know if anyone else has thoughts on that.
We have a whole chat going on at the moment, so okay. Oh wow.
Sorry, I'm just sort of sharing one of these. So these are two fragments from a charter, which and so there is more text that's not there now. To me, these are fragments.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see how else you could define. I don't see how else you could define that. And I see, and James Freeman, who's our manuscript expert here at the UL, he's given us the sort of definition of fragment as it exists in our style guide is one or more remnants from a manuscript whose survival in a form different to the original state has been accidental or an unintended consequence of their use for some other purpose, not directly concerned with their original content or history. But of course, this is an ongoing conversation.
I see that our time is just about up. Otherwise, I want to thank all three of our panel members for really fascinating presentations and discussion. I thank all of you for your attention, and I'll see you in 6 weeks or so. All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very
Thanks.
much.